Sir, I've told you twice already, we cannot help you without proper identification. Before her was a man in his late 60s, his flannel shirt worn soft with age, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to explain his situation. "I understand, miss, but my wallet was stolen this morning," 69-year-old Walter Green said softly, his voice carrying the weight of dignity despite his circumstances. "My wife, she needs her medication. I just need to withdraw enough to... Without identification, I cannot process any transaction." Victoria glanced at her watch, her tone sharpening. "And frankly, sir, you don't look like someone who banks here. Perhaps you're confused about which branch." "I've banked here for 42 years, Walter interrupted gently, his pale blue eyes holding a sadness that went deeper than this moment. "Since before you were born." Victoria's assistant, Marcus, shifted uncomfortably nearby, but Victoria waved him off. "Sir, I don't have time for this. We have important clients waiting. You'll need to come back with proper documentation." Walter stood there for a long moment, his shoulders sagging. "My wife, she's at home waiting." His voice cracked slightly. "She has congestive heart failure. The prescription costs $200. "That's not my problem." Victoria's voice carried across the lobby, causing several customers to turn and stare. "Now please, you're holding up the line." Walter nodded slowly, his weathered hands carefully folding a piece of paper he'd been holding, a deposit slip from 1983, laminated and carried in his shirt pocket for decades. He walked toward the exit, moving with the careful steps of someone who'd learned to carry disappointment quietly. Marcus approached Victoria's desk, his expression troubled. "That was harsh, Victoria. The man clearly needed help." "The rules exist for a reason," she replied, already turning to her computer. "We have the Harrington meeting in 2 hours. That's a $3 billion deal. That's what matters." What Victoria didn't know was that Walter Green had once been one of the wealthiest men in the state. 40 years ago, he'd built a technology company from nothing, revolutionizing data storage systems. But when his wife Elaine developed heart problems 20 years back, Walter made a choice. He sold his company, invested the money in medical research, and stepped away from the spotlight to care for her. He'd lived simply since then, their comfortable but modest home paid for, their needs met by careful savings. His son, Thomas Green, had taken a different path, building his own empire in venture capital, becoming a millionaire CEO who rarely visited. The relationship had fractured years ago over Thomas's refusal to slow down, to prioritize family over fortune. That afternoon, Victoria prepared meticulously for the Harrington meeting. Jonathan Harrington was legendary, a billionaire investor, known for his unconventional methods and his absolute insistence on character assessment. He'd once walked away from a billion-dollar deal because the CEO was rude to a janitor. When Harrington arrived, Victoria was ready. Polished presentation, flawless pitch, every detail perfect. But Harrington seemed distracted, his silver-haired head tilted as if listening to something beyond the conference room. "Ms. Ashford," Harrington interrupted her presentation, "tell me about your morning. Any interesting encounters?" Victoria blinked, thrown off. No, just routine banking business." "Really?" Harrington sharpened his eyes. "Nothing memorable at all?" Marcus, sitting in the corner taking notes, went very still. "There was an elderly man," Victoria said carefully, "but he didn't have proper identification. I followed protocol exactly." "Protocol?" Harrington leaned back. "And did this elderly man explain why he needed help?" "Something about medication for his wife, but that wasn't relevant to—" "Not relevant?" Harrington stood abruptly. "Ms. Ashford, that man was Walter Green. He called my office an hour ago from a payphone." He paused, letting that sink in. "Walter Green, who 40 years ago gave me my first major investment when I was nobody, who taught me that wealth means nothing if we forget our humanity." Victoria's face drained of color. "I didn't know." "Exactly, you didn't know. You saw an elderly man in worn clothes and decided he didn't matter." Harrington gathered his papers. "Walter Green told me about your interaction. He wasn't calling to complain. That's not who he is. He was calling to warn me about doing business with someone who judges people by their appearance rather than their dignity." "Mr. Harrington, please." Walter Green donated $40 million to cardiac research because he couldn't bear the thought of other families suffering like his did. He lives modestly because he believes wealth should serve purpose, not ego. Harrington moved toward the door. "This deal is off. I don't invest with people who lack basic human decency." The silence after he left was devastating. Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet. "My grandfather knew Walter Green. He said Walter was the kindest, wealthy man he'd ever met, gave away most of his fortune to help others." Victoria sat frozen, the magnitude of her mistake crushing her. She'd humiliated a man who embodied everything she claimed to value: loyalty, dignity, perseverance, because she was too busy, too focused on the big deal, to see the person standing before her. That evening, Victoria did something she'd never done. She looked up Walter's address and drove to his modest home in the older part of town. When he answered the door, surprise crossed his gentle face. "Mr. Green, I came to apologize," she said, her voice unsteady. "What I did today was inexcusable. You needed help, and I turned you away. I made you feel invisible, worthless. I'm so sorry." Walter studied her for a long moment, then opened the door wider. "Would you like to meet my wife?" Inside, Elaine Green sat in a comfortable chair, an oxygen tube beneath her nose, her eyes bright with warmth. "Walter told me about today," she said softly. "He also told me you looked tired, stressed, like someone carrying weight they're not meant to carry alone." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "I lost a $3 billion deal because of how I treated your husband. I deserve to lose it." "Money comes and goes," Elaine said gently, "but the person you choose to be, that stays with you forever. The question is, who do you want to be?" Walter pulled out that laminated deposit slip from 1983. "This was my first deposit. $73. I keep it to remember that every fortune starts small, every person starts somewhere, and dignity doesn't require a dollar amount." Victoria broke down completely. "How can you be kind to me after what I did?" "Because," Walter said quietly, sitting beside his wife, "we've all been the person who forgot to see. The measure isn't the mistake, it's what you do after." Victoria spent the next months transforming Premier National's culture. She implemented policies ensuring every customer received dignified service regardless of appearance. She volunteered at senior centers, learning stories of lives lived fully. She called Jonathan Harrington not to ask for the deal back, but to thank him for the lesson. 6 months later, Walter returned to the bank. Victoria was helping an elderly woman when she noticed him. She excused herself and approached. "Mr. Green, how is Elaine?" "Holding steady," he smiled. "Her medication is working well." He paused. "I heard about the changes you've made here. Jonathan told me. He's impressed." "I was wrong," Victoria said simply. "You taught me that." Walter's eyes crinkled with warmth. "You taught yourself. You just needed a reminder that every person who walks through that door is someone's father, someone's wife, someone who matters." "Thank you," Victoria whispered, "for your grace." "Thank you," Walter replied, "for your growth." The lesson was simple but profound. Every person carries invisible stories, hidden struggles, quiet dignity. When we rush past them, when we judge by surfaces, we don't just fail them, we fail ourselves. True success isn't measured in billions, but in moments of basic human kindness, in seeing people when it would be easier to look away.